So thank you for joining me on today's special episode on this podcast. And I'm joined today by Niki. I've never known how to pronounce your second name. So Niki, how do you pronounce your second name?
Doeg, as in Doeg.
Doeg. Okay, beautiful. Yeah. So Niki's got a very interesting story that came to light to me anyway. Looks like everyone else knew except me, but I'd like to interview and talk to Niki about her experience. So over to you, Niki, to tell me your backstory as to what happened before you did this challenge. Like what was it that made you sign up to that challenge?
So I'm now 50 and I did this challenge 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. But about 3 or 4 years before that, say 3 years before I did the challenge, I I'd had my career in my 20s. You know, I'd started my career and worked very hard to develop that. You go through your education, you go through your first few jobs, you start building your career. And I was very career orientated. Went into banking, into project management, all that sort of stuff. It meant a lot of travel. It was very exciting. It was great. Spent a lot of time there. Then got married in my early 30s. And then my 30s were around having babies. So I had 2 kids. Yeah. And at first it was juggling work because I stayed working and bringing up my 2 little boys who are very big now. And so my 30s were around my children, really. And then I got to my 40s and my kids were starting to not really need me as much. Mm-hmm. I think the kids had shown me that maybe there are alternatives to your career choices sometimes, that, you know, the one that works in your 20s and maybe your early 30s doesn't necessarily work when you've got, you know, kids and lots of demands on your time. Yeah. And I got to that point where I'd been a single person, I'd been a career person, and then I'd been a wife, and then I'd been a mom. And I would say it's like layers of an onion. And all these layers had gone on. And I got to my 40s and I'd kind of just struggled a little bit to understand, when you peel back the layers, who was Niki again. Mm. And
had you kind of forgotten who Niki was?
Well, it was just there were so many other aspects that had been added on that were all part of me now. But I think because the kids didn't need me as much, I'd probably understood. I'd put work in perspective, and I'd realised actually there was time there for me then. But it's, what do I do? I'd never been that sporty. I'd done gym stuff and swimming, swum a lot, but not really done any sport. And so I got an opportunity to go and do a little rowing taster session down at York on the river, and it was one that the school sort of coordinated. And I remember going there probably about 8 years ago, on a Saturday morning, bright and early, and thinking, this is my chance. I'm going to find myself something that's just for me. Yeah. You know, but it gets me out, it gets me moving, it gets me into something. And I went with a friend of mine, Frances, who I already knew, and I bumped into another couple of ladies down there, Helen and Jeanette. And we had our first rowing on the river, and it was hilarious because it's really technical. Who knew? You don't just get in a boat and just row.
Go for it, yeah. Technical. And how many were you in the boat? Was it all 4 of you?
No, it was all 4 of us, but we were part of an 8.
Okay.
So right. With a cox, and we'd go out on the river, and you'd poodle up and down the river, and being shouted at by the coach or the cox, and because it was so technical, you had to concentrate. Yeah. And the thing that I loved was actually it took you away from everything else because you had to concentrate. You didn't think of work or home or what you were worrying about just before you went down. And you would go up the river, you would see the wildlife, you would get outside, and you were with some really fun people doing a sport that you were doing together, and you were encouraging each other and everything. It was great.
Yeah. So that got you to the point of getting you into rowing in the first place, would you say?
Yeah, and starting to see that you can do a sport. You know, I was in my 40s. I was thinking, you can't start a sport in your 40s. You know, you just end up being rubbish. And that was always what held me back. Actually, was always the thought that I would not be good enough. You know, that I wouldn't be able to do it as well as other people. And so that always stopped me fast.
And was there an aspect of you thought it might be too late to start something?
Yeah, definitely. And you know, I'd hit 40. I was probably what, 40, about 42. And I just thought, you know, who takes up a sport like rowing at age 42 or anything, you know? And so it had put me off. And if I hadn't been with other people encouraging me, I probably wouldn't have gone, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we went down and we even started competing quite quickly. So they really encouraged you, even though you weren't that great. And I can remember doing our first race, and we were in an 8 again, an oct, and we didn't even get to the start line, because as we got in the boat, we'd got into the boat and the boat had gone down on the step because of the weight of us, and it had bent the rudder. We hadn't realised. So all the way down the river, we were just going donk, donk into the side of the river. And the cops were screaming at us and everyone was trying to row one way. And we actually got disqualified before the start of the race for being a danger to ourselves and others on the river. But we did another race and we did all right. And, you know, and it was great because you were with people, you just had great fun. And then after the session on every Saturday morning, we'd tootle off to a local hotel and have coffee and cake and put hand cream on and, you know, talk about, oh, they've shouted at us today, or, oh gosh, you know. So yeah, it was great fun, really good fun, really got a lot of enjoyment out of it.
Okay, so you'd found this spark, you'd found something that you really could get your teeth into, and it gave you what it sounds like was escapism, to get away from something and have that very precious me time at a relatively, like, people get into rowing at any age, but in this case you got into rowing in your early 40s by the sounds of it. So tell me then, like, why did you sign up to this challenge? Why did you sign up to the challenge, and who was the first person you told when you did?
Right, so we were at the rowing dinner. So it was the first rowing dinner. We'd been rowing for a year, less than a year. And they have this annual rowing dinner, and it's to raise money and all the rest of it. And it's a lovely dinner. So we were at this dinner, and it was the wrong side of midnight, probably. And it was probably the wrong side of a few glasses of wine. Yeah. And Frances, who is a lovely, lovely woman, she loves reading books. I mean, books can be really dangerous. But she loves reading books, and she'd always read these books. And she'd read a book about 10 years before when she used to take the little ones to the library. And she'd take the little ones to the library and she'd sit them in the corner with their little books. And then she would disappear off to the adventure section. And she would pick out an armchair adventure and she would read it. And she'd read this book, fabulous book about a lady who had decided to row across the Atlantic with her husband as like a honeymoon row. Yeah, I know, it's a bad idea. And in this book, the woman and her husband had set off, very alpha male, you know, very sporty, all the rest of it. She'd trained well, and about a week in, he'd had panic attacks and he couldn't cope with the fact of being so far from land. And he had to be rescued. I think he probably thought she was going to be rescued as well. But she said to him, actually, you know what? I'm going to keep going because I'm really enjoying myself. And he got off the boat and she did it on her own in a 2-man boat. And it took her a long time, took her about, 106 days or something. And she did it. And obviously they're divorced now, but, you know, she did it. And an amazing thing. So she'd read this book. And I think, you know, she'd started rowing, obviously triggered something, a few glasses of wine. And she just said to us, you know what, just because we're middle-aged mums, full-time working mums, I don't see why we can't do something like that. And everyone just went, yeah, why not? And she said it was a magical moment because she said, how often in your life? And she says, you should always try and say yes to stuff because, or suggest stuff, because how often in your life do you get the size of challenge of that, which is rowing across the Atlantic, 3,000 miles, and you get 3 other people just say yes? You know?
Just like timing, right? Because there was drink involved. Yes, there was, but everything just came together at that point. And you're all at the right stage of your life. You're all right.
And we probably all did it for slightly different reasons. The first person I told was obviously my husband, who wasn't that happy about it.
I was going to say, how did he react?
Not well at all. And obviously that was difficult because I work with my husband. We run a business together. So I'd moved into his business when we had young children. It was a lot easier, and so we ran a business together. So I wasn't just saying I'm going to leave you and actually quite young children for up to 3 months. I was saying I was going to leave the business as well. So actually, I was land crew for a number of months. I couldn't actually commit properly to getting in the boat. I was land crew until I helped out with everything to do with preparing for the challenge, which was huge. There was a lot of work involved, and eventually he said, "You're doing all this work, and you're not going to get the glory moment at the end." He said, "You know, you're doing the work the same as all the other girls that are going to be in the boat. You need to have the adventure at the end of it as well." And that's how it came to be. So he eventually said, "You need to go." Actually, you know,
he came round to it.
Yeah, and then I was able to secure my place in the boat. So, but although we'd all said yes straight away, it took up to 9 months for us all to be confirmed in that boat. So
wow. So like, in terms of you getting help, in terms of you getting that guidance, because this was a total new animal for you, right? Like, it was, yes, you were into rowing, but like the challenge of having to row 3,000 miles, like where do you start with getting help?
Well, we had to go to a lot of places, and actually that was the big thing, and we couldn't have done it without asking pretty much everybody for help. It's a big lesson, actually, and it taught me a lot about the fact you don't go through this life on your own, you know, and people don't mind being asked for help. In fact, they love being asked to help, and it's amazing because we couldn't have done it without. I mean, we had to raise the entry fee was €24,000. We had to buy a boat, which actually we bought a boat for £67,000. Yeah. This is all money we had to raise. We had to raise money for the trips and the training. We had 3 years of preparation to do all of this. And then we also wanted to raise money for charity. So, you know, and then we had to get our Yachtmaster Ocean, which is the top level of sailing qualification that you can get. Yeah. We had to get sponsors, you know, to get the money for this. We had to train physically. We had to learn all our medical stuff because we were out there for 10 weeks. And while you're on that boat, you're not allowed to get any help of any type or you're disqualified. It's a race. Wow. So you're on your own. There is a support yacht, and that support yacht is only there for emergencies. And the support yacht sails around the cruise. So if I tell you a bit about the challenge, actually, I haven't really told you about the challenge, have I? No, because like you said about there being an entrance fee, like what, are there other boats and stuff involved? Yeah, so it's called the 𝗪𝗪𝗃 Whiskey Atlantic Challenge, and it used to take place every 2 years, and after the year we did it, it takes place every year now. Okay. It starts in December, because that's actually the best time of the year to cross the Atlantic because of weather and currents. There's no hurricanes and tropical storms and things. Mm-hmm. And you go from La Gomera in the Canaries and you go across to Antigua. It's exactly the same route Christopher Columbus went across. And it's 3,000 miles. You have to be self-sufficient. So you go in a rowing boat, but they're obviously ocean rowing boats. They look a little bit different to normal rowing boats, obviously. Yeah. And you can have crews of 1, 2, or 4. So it's a race, and there are different classes within the races. Obviously, the singles, the pairs, the fours, and it's a race across. A lot of people don't make it across. They have to be rescued, and you have to be self-sufficient. So you have to take everything that you need for the crossing. You make your own water through a desalinator. And you take all of your food, which is dried explorer food and various other things. You have to deal with every medical emergency. because actually the support yacht will be going round and round all of the boats. So as you set off, you're quite close.
Yeah.
But after halfway in, there's 1,000 miles between the front and the back boat. And you've got a sailboat going round.
So hours or days for them to get to you.
It could be 10 days away. Yeah. So if you need an emergency rescue, you are usually going to be rescued by a passing vessel. So part of the race thing is that you have a satellite phone with spare batteries and things. So hopefully you would never, you have a beacon, you know, so if you went under, it would go off. And usually you would be rescued within 24 to 48 hours. There's usually a boat somewhere in the vicinity that would get you. But you have to have massive heart tests, all sorts of stuff done before you're allowed to go in, because they literally can't risk, you know, somebody having a heart attack. I mean, it could happen, but, you know, they eliminate all of that quite early on.
So you must have had to get into some serious shape for this.
Yeah, but I would say getting into the shape, we did have to, but with the amount of work and things that we had to do elsewhere, it was probably one of the, it was important to be in a certain physical shape, but for us, it wasn't as important to be in this type of shape to win it. We just had to be in the type of shape that we knew that we could get across in one piece, because there was actually all of the other things. You had to learn how your boat operated. There was a lot of wiring on the boat, and then batteries for the water maker and the solar panels, and you had to learn how to rewire and bypass, and fix everything, and
like
so
a massive jigsaw.
Yeah, but you had to learn all of this on top of getting fit. So time, when you're trying to also juggle your family and your work and everything. And whenever people say to me now, I haven't got the time, I just look at them, and I don't look at them in a bad way. It's kind of that inside. I know that actually when people say they haven't got the time, they do have the time. It's how they actually manage their time, because through that, we actually had no choice. We had to find the time. You got up an hour earlier. You went to bed an hour later. You multitasked, and you asked for help. Okay.
Great. So, well, what day in December did you set sail?
Well, we should have set sail on the 15th of December in 2015, but there was bad weather. So we'd been in La Gomera, so you get yourself all ready. You get yourself to the point where you've got your boat, you've got your funding, you've got your supplies, and that all goes out about 6 weeks before the race starts. It goes out in a big shipping container to La Gomera.
Right. Yeah.
And so then you get there 2 weeks before, your boat's waiting out the shipping container, and then you pimp your ride. There was 26 boats all in a line in La Gomera on the harbour, and it's a great time because the rowing community, like a lot of exercise or sports communities, is very inclusive, and it's very sharing and caring. It's a brilliant time. You know, it's one of my favourite times, that time there, because you're all mixed and you're all talking, but you walk up and down and go, look at their seats. What have they got on there? We haven't got those. And it comes to this point where you thought you were ready, but because other people have got stuff, you've got to be ready. And the Chinese supermarket and the little hardware store and everything in La Gomera, it's a tiny little island, just sell out of everything, like yoga mats and all sorts, because people are doing and doing all sorts of stuff because other people have got them. It's hilarious. Wicked. It really is.
Wicked. So that's
15th of December, but storms, couldn't go. And so we had to wait 5 days. So our families had all gone. They weren't staying for the start line anyway, because we thought the kids might get a bit upset and stuff. So they'd gone just before the 15th. And then we had 5 days to wait. They'd taken all our luggage. We thought we were going on a boat with minimal. You literally took 2 T-shirts, 2 shorts, a pair of like special boat shoes, an iPod, and your wet weather gear. That was all your personal stuff.
10 weeks.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but they'd taken all that. So we had these 5 days. We had to find somewhere to stay because the accommodation was gone, because we thought we were on a boat. So we went and stayed in this really posh hotel because it was the only one that had availability. With our little 2 pairs of shorts, 2 T-shirts, bought a toothbrush to wear because we were going on the boat. So, and then 20th, they said, okay, it's fine. The winds are still high. You're going to have to go, but we're going to have to keep a careful eye on it because the winds might push the smaller boats onto rocks just offshore. But we're going to risk it. And early in the morning, we went for our final safety and whatever briefings and got on the boat. We led the way out. We had the joy of leading the way out. So we were in the first position for at least 5 minutes until the
You're winning. You're winning.
Yeah. For 5 minutes.
Did you take the selfie of all the boats behind you? Kind of thing?
Yeah, it was sad leaving the. I can remember getting quite upset about leaving the boys. My youngest was, I don't know, 7 or 8, and I can remember ringing them just before we set off, and they were having their breakfast in the UK, and my husband said, "Do you want to speak to kids?" Okay, I'll speak to kids. Spoke to Aidan, who's the youngest, and I said, "Oh, Aidan, Mummy's going now." And he went, "Can I pass you back to Daddy? My Rice Krispies again, sorry." And and at that point, it hit me actually that I'm going to miss them a lot more than they're going to miss me.
So you're in the boat, you set sail. Like I'm just trying to stick myself in the boat, like where you've got all this kit around you, you've got your three other mates there. Like, do you remember that first look when did it happen? When did it land that you were actually doing this?
I think you have the excitement of the race, and then lots of little boats come out and kind of follow you for a while and do some filming, and you can see your other competitors. But because we're in a rowing boat and you're so low down, and it was the waves were significant when we started. Within hours, you couldn't see anything. And at that point, Helen started getting sick because we knew that she gets seasick, and we had every remedy under the sun going to try and, help with that. But she was being violently ill. But we were on a shift pattern of 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 24 hours a day.
All 4 of you?
Yeah, so 2 on. Two on for 2 hours, 2 in the cabins resting, swap.
And then swap, right?
Every 2 hours until you get to Antigua. And then, so Helen was rowing, being sick every 20 minutes, rowing, being sick every 20 minutes, rowing. And it was when she first started throwing up, and we've got this special ultra fuel, it's called, and it's what they use in hospitals for people that can't eat. They can only do liquid, and it absorbs into your system in 6 minutes. If you can get it into your system and keep it down. So our big focus was getting her to drink, talking to her to try and distract her so that she wouldn't throw up, so that it would absorb. Keep
it down, yeah.
Yeah, and then once that done, we knew that even if she wasn't eating anything or doing anything, she was fine. She was getting the nutrients, the minerals, the vitamins that she needed. And the first day, it was quite exciting, even with Helen throwing up, and everything going on, and there's lots to see, and it was coping with the waves. And even though we've been out for training practice rows and stuff, it's not the same when you're on your own. You know that nobody's going to help. It was at night. It got dark, really dark. Even though we were still quite close to land, it still got really dark.
Stars in the sky, that's it, right?
Yeah, and it was the darkness. It was coping with everything on a boat. You're harnessed on, and you have to be harnessed on with a 3-point climbing harness all the time. So we never took our belts off, the ones that went around our waist, that stayed on the whole time. Yeah. And as you came out of the cabin, the little tiny cabins, little tiny hatches, imagine like a slightly big oven. And you come out of that, and the first thing you do is hook on.
That's right.
And the reason for that is if you, unless it's flat calm, which we never had, we had 1 day of flat calm. Otherwise we had significant waves, significant currents. If you go over the boat without your harness on, you don't get back on. And unfortunately, during another race that was happening, it started after hours, going from Portugal to somewhere, again across the Atlantic. Yeah. A young 21-year-old lost his life. No. He wasn't harnessed on properly, and he went overboard. And you just can't, the currents and the boat, it's a rowing boat, you can't get that. Yeah. So this harness was very, very important being on. And you obviously then have to move around the boat because there's 2 people in cabins, 2 people on the deck. It's only a small space. You have to go to the loo, you have to move around, you have to get things, you have to come out of your cabin. And it was that first night of hooking on and knowing the dangers, and it being pitch black and trying to get used to a head torch because that's the only way you can see, and the massive waves. And it was roller coaster when we first set off, because it was the back end of this bad weather that had been there. And that's when it really hit, that first day. And actually after that point, for about 2 or 3 days, I had no real memories And I don't know whether it's my, sorry for the banging, I don't know if it's my mind has just hidden that away. It's just, you know, it just got me through, and I just don't really, I have very vague memories about it all.
Wow. So, but after that, what would you say was the lowest point during your row? When did you really need the sense of community of, you know, your 3 other rowers to help you through? What was your lowest point?
Well, I mean, you needed that community all the time. The people that did it solo, they're amazing. I mean, through the preparation and the actual row, one of the things that kept us going was our differences. We were all 4 very different people with 4 very different natural skill sets, likes, dislikes, all the rest of it. And that got us across. Because when one person was low because of something, another person might have been absolutely fine and they were able to use their skills to bring you out of it. And other times, so for example, I have lots of low points. I have lots of extreme high points too. One of the low points was I did not realise how much I would miss my family. I didn't realise how much I relied on them, my husband and my kids. And I got into an absolute funk at one point, and it lasted over a week, maybe more. And it was at a point when I started to affect the others on the boat with me being, I was just very silent, very withdrawn, missing my family. I just, you know, that was probably about 2 or 3 weeks in, and it just hit me and I wasn't there with them. And it was then, they kind of did a little mini intervention, which was great. Sometimes you need a little boot up the backside, you know, you do, you know, you can wallow. And then they worked out ways to get me through it. So they knew me enough. So one of them would distract me and say, right, let's imagine you're going to redesign your lounge, you know, where would you go? What are you going to do? So they would use distraction techniques. Others, the skipper, Jeanette, had arranged for people at home to write some letters that she'd hidden. And so she brought those out at appropriate times when I was feeling low, just to give me a little boost. And, you know, so that it was that sort of thing. So it was the other team members getting me out of that. But we all did different things. Helen really struggled steering at night. We lost all of our steering. We had an auto helm, like on a yacht, where you program your course in, which we all had to do ourselves. We learned how to do that. And then the auto helm would hopefully do your rudder. But because we're going so slow and it was so wavy, the rudder was going mad. And it burnt out. We had 2, they both burnt out. At that point, we had to tie 2 strings to the rudder, sit on deck, and actually manually steer to the compass. And the compass is backwards because of the way the boat, because you're actually facing backwards. So you have to work that out when you're tired. And at night, when it's dark and when the waves are 20-foot waves, and if you get broach on, you will just literally roll, capsize down the wave. So you can't
broach on being the wave coming side on.
And it smacks against the side of the boat and it'll just roll you down. So you always have to have your nose pointing into the waves. And the waves don't behave like normal. You know, they don't just come in one way. So one minute it'll be coming straight at you, and then the next minute the currents will change, and you have to turn because the rudder's not doing it for you. You have to manually try and turn, and at those times the rudder would flatten against the boat. The waves are too strong. So you would have to get everybody out on deck. You'd have an all hands on deck emergency situation. You'd all be trying to steer with one side to try and pull you round. And Helen didn't like that very much. She didn't like the dark and that. And so I would sit with her and help her with the steering, because I wasn't afraid of the dark or the waves. So whereas I had some key weak moments, there were other areas that, you know, other people struggled with, maybe that other people helped them through. And that teamwork was absolutely vital.
Absolutely
it really
vital. And that, how strong did you feel that bond, like on the boat? Like, did you feel it? Like, was it palpable? It's like, you could, and like I said, it kept you going. And we had niggles and arguments and all the rest of it, because again, it's a high stress situation. It's, you know, there were some points we unfortunately about halfway through. As I said, the reason that you did it at this time of the year is because there's no tropical storms and things like that happen, except for the year that we did it. So it was the first time since 1957 or something that they actually ended up with a hurricane in the Atlantic. And
we had about 3 days notice, and we were told, right, you're going, you know, you're obviously working your way across to the west, and they said, go south. We're like, no, we don't want to go south because, you know, so we rang every day on the satellite phone. It was the only way you could communicate with land, and we would get a weather update. So you had a member of team, a land crew, who would give you a weather update.
Yeah.
And once a day we would get that weather update, and they said, go south. We were like, why? Well, there's some tricky weather coming. You'd be better going south. And the problem with going south was you were going outside of the current, and then to come back up into the current was very difficult. You weren't using the natural currents to help you across. And we're like, well, we don't really want to go south. No, go south, go south. And by about day 2, we were aware that actually this was a significant storm coming. And so we worked our way as south as we could to try and get out of the eye of the storm. And we were lucky, we'd already taken a slightly more southern route anyway. Some teams that took a northern route were much closer to the centre of the storm. And it was a tropical storm, and as it passed over us, it was reclassified as a hurricane. So once the waves and the weather got so bad, you just literally couldn't be, you know, out on deck. We put the power anchor out, which is, you obviously can't use an anchor when it's 2 miles down below you. It looks like a big parachute. It's the same sort of size. Yeah. It's on a series of strings, ropes. You throw it in, and it pulls the bow of the nose. So it goes down. The parachute goes down sort of diagonally across about 80 meters down, and it opens. Yeah. And then it kind of holds the boat, and it pulls the nose into the waves. So it points the nose of the boat into the waves so you don't roll. Mm-hmm. And it keeps you generally from drifting too far. So we put our power anchor out, which is horrible. It's a real pain. It's a lot of ropes and things to work out. And we put that out, and then we got into the cabins. And other than little very quick trips out for essential toilet, with all of your safety gear and life jackets and ropes on, we were in the cabins for 72 hours while the hurricane passed over. The waves were huge, you know, 30, 40-foot waves. And that was a bit of a scary time.
As you say that, I'm imagining like the sounds that you must have been hearing, and like, you know, looking around the little hole and seeing your mates, and you just being battered. And is that how the noise did sound when the waves hit? It sounded like the boat was just going to crack in half. And these little cabins were, you call them cabins, but they're, you know, you couldn't fit 4 in one. You could squeeze 2 into each. So there's one at one end of the boat, which was tiny. It was the office, and you actually had to put your feet in these tubes under the deck. So we called it the coffin, but it was very hot. That was the sort of economy class, because that was a very hot, very small one, where the rudder was, where all the electrical equipment was. And then the luxury first class accommodation was at the front of the boat. And that was slightly bigger, slightly longer. You couldn't stretch out, but you could get 2 people laid next to each other. We had all of our sort of clothes in on nets on the side. But there was disadvantages to that one, because in the storm, because you are being held down, so you're in one place, as the waves went under, the boat would go up and then slam down onto the wave. So if you're in that end cabin there, you'd be down on the floor 1 minute, up on the ceiling the next, down on the floor. Max down.
Yeah. Oh my God. So that wasn't as nice. And the other down point that I had was my claustrophobia. I didn't realise I really suffered from claustrophobia, because, you know, you don't spend a lot of time in small spaces. Obviously, I knew that I didn't really like, you know, having my head covered with a blanket, you know, when you were a kid or whatever else. Yeah. But these little cabins had to have the doors sealed shut. There were special doors. They were just the sort of size of a small little window, and you had to seal it, because if you capsized, they were watertight. If it was open and you capsized, the boat wouldn't self-right, whereas these boats were built to go over and then to go all the way back over. Right. Now, we were lucky we didn't capsize on the journey. Lots of people do. So we knew distinct possibility. So, and as it got hotter and hotter as you went further and further across, I liken it to just putting your oven on a low, you know, 100 heat, And then when you're nice and hot from being outside, you've been rowing and you're tired, and then having to open the oven door, get in it, and close the oven door
behind you,
and spend 2 hours in there with little there's no, you know, there was an air thing that allowed air in, but there was no breeze or anything. It would just allow you to not die, you know. And as it got worse for me as it got across. I actually, even in the hurricane, would have preferred to be sat on deck in the hurricane outside rather than being in the cabins, because I almost had panic attacks to, you know, just having to close the door because I just didn't want to be in there.
Crikey. And has that claustrophobia now gone? Have you ever had to get into a situation like that again?
It's not as bad. It's definitely not as bad. I haven't tested it too much. When I came back, I had to have some MRI scans because I damaged my coccyx. On day 3, I had a really nasty fall at night. I was putting my wet weather gear on because it was so stormy. At night, I was leaning up against one of the cabin areas and my foot slipped, and my coccyx landed on a metal edge. And I ended up. I had a rainbow bottom for a couple of weeks, and I couldn't sit on my coccyx, which is a bit of a problem when you sat rowing all day. Yeah. Luckily, our rowing seats were made of all these yoga mats glued together, because you had to have your own. You had 2 bungees and a bunch of yoga mats cut in the shape of a seat, all stuck together, that you put on the rowing seat, because you rowed with no clothes on most of the time on your bottom because of chaffing.
Yeah.
So from a hygiene and a shape of your bottom perspective, you know, you had to have your own seat. So you would have your own seat, you would come out, and that would be at swap over time. You had a few minutes to swap over. They would take their seat off and go and fasten it, and then you would put your seat on. And so because it was yoga seats, as you got sores on your bottom, which you did, you put a little bit of pseudocreme on the sore, you'd sit on your seat, and then you dig a little hole out where the sore was. So your sore wasn't
no friction.
rubbing.
Yeah.
So I did that for my coccyx. So I had this huge big hole for my coccyx, and my coccyx wasn't actually had pressure on it, but because it still hurt, I did a froggy row. I would row normally with one leg, and then my other leg would be bent like a frog, so that I could lift one butt cheek off as a row. But that meant I got a pressure sore on my bottom. So talk about teamwork. Having your team members have to dress your bottom for 2 weeks because you can't do it yourself. It makes you very close.
Yeah.
And we did say, actually, because you're rowing with no clothes on, and obviously you're staggering up and down a boat towards each other. As you go to the loo or as you change shifts, you have to go past each other. And you have to clip, you know, because there's a top rope and a bottom rope, safety rope. So as you get to one end, then you have to clip and go in 3-point. But as you're coming down towards each other, you are literally walking towards 2 people sat, and you're higher up, and you've got no clothes on. And we did say we could actually identify each other from the waist down in a lineup.
That's close. That is close.
Yes. Yeah, it's intimate.
That's close. So what I've heard rumours that there was a time that you all rode completely naked. Is that right? Or
and the only time that you would, especially from about halfway onwards, but every tiny seam with the salt water and the sun and the rowing action, so many areas of you are levers. Anything with a seam would chaff, and you take the skin off. It's like sandpaper. So actually it was easier, and the only time we actually put tops on is because the intense sun, and it was to protect ourselves from the sun. So we always had a hat on, and we always had a little light t-shirt, but we cut them, you know, we cut sleeves off, we cut bits off, anything that had the but down below, definitely you couldn't. You know, there was too much rubbing and chaffing going on. So crikey. And one standout highlight for you, other than rowing completely started? There was loads. The camaraderie, the beautiful conversations we had about things that really meant a lot to us in life, the stories that we'll never repeat, the games that we used to play. But then I think for me, it was the time. You had the time without any distractions to think about stuff. It was lovely. So I don't think anyone in this world very often gets that amount of time just to think about everything.
10 weeks, 10 whole weeks.
And it was, you know, no mobile phones, no news, no social media, no nothing. So we did a lot of thinking, a lot of talking, a lot of laughing. And it was the wildlife. We saw birds out 1,500 miles from land. Every day we saw birds. Where do they come from? And all different ones. We saw dolphins quite a lot. A turtle came and swam with us for a day, a massive, great big turtle. And it was lovely. And it came and swam around us. Then he obviously got bored and overtook us, which was a bit depressing at that time. We saw amazing fish. We saw sharks. We saw whales. We saw different ones. And probably a highlight from the wildlife point of view was when we saw a whale quite far off, a big one, big as a bus type one, you know, big whale. And we were a bit worried at first because obviously if these things get too close, they can flip you, but it was amazing. And it was a beautiful day. And this whale was swimming around and we were watching. And then the next thing we realised is she's got a baby with her, baby calf.
Oh, wow.
And it was funny. And at this point we were going loopy. We were probably about 2/3 of the way through the journey. And we were like, oh, she's a mummy just like us. Oh, she's got a baby. And then she was letting the baby get closer and closer. So she stayed quite far out, like she knew she was going to upset us if and the baby came close. And that looked, oh, she knows we're mummies. She's letting her baby come close. Anyway, this baby calf literally swam. We had to lift the oars up. She swam right round the boat, and we've got film of that. It's so lovely. I mean, we haven't got loads of film because actually, we didn't want to spoil the moment by just being on a camera, you know.
Yeah.
But that was a special moment, and I think other than the end of the race, I think the best bit for me was the night times, and the no light pollution, and the stars, and the moon, and it was so. When the sea wasn't too rough, the stars would reflect in the ocean, and you were like you were in a bubble, a black bubble of stars, and you felt like you could just go like that and your arm would be in the stars, and the phosphorance of the oars in the water sparkling, and really magical moments that you'll never experience anywhere else.
Yeah. I'm sat here in awe. I'm sat here very jealous because, yeah, as you say, very few people will ever get that experience, right? That life experience. So 10 weeks, what was it like stepping off the boat?
It was amazing. We got to 200 miles off Antigua, and at that point we were told, the satellite phone went, the safety officer came in and said, you are now within 200 miles of Antigua, which is a big mark because at that point you're within helicopter rescue point. Yeah. So at that point, gosh, you know, the feeling was actually, we're not across yet, but we're probably not going to die.
200 miles. Yeah, what's 200 miles?
Yeah.
Right.
And then the weather was quite bad just before we got into Antigua the night before. We didn't want to come in the dark, so we put the power anchor out again. We'd had trouble when we did the North Sea crossing finding the harbour in the dark. And Antigua's a very complicated harbour to come in. If you miss it, you can go miles down and you have to try and row back against current. So we said, we want to go in the daylight, we want to see our families. So we had a night on power anchor waiting for dawn. And that was a strange moment because we were all ready to get off the boat at this point. You know, this was it. We were definitely ready to get off the boat. It's a long time. And that night we put the power anchor out and we just literally had to sit and wait. It was a bit choppy, but we had to sit and wait. And all of a sudden, I think it hit us all at the same time that we'd been working for 3 years at fast forward speed to begin with to get us to the start line. We'd managed to get across the Atlantic through all of the things that went on there, the good and the bad. And then the next morning, it's going to be over. Mm. And I think we'd always seen ourselves finishing. but we hadn't seen ourselves as in ending it. You know, that our adventure was over. And actually that was really tough, and we hadn't planned for that. It was awful, because it was like, oh, this thing that I've been doing for 3 years is just going to be over tomorrow.
Part of my life, like it's become part of my life.
Yeah.
Like, what next?
And then it's just going to be cut off, dead, done. And they say that athletes and actors and all sorts of people have this. When you're on something, you're preparing for something for such a long time that when it comes to an end, you have this adrenaline hangover. Actually, it's quite a big thing. And we hadn't planned for it, but we had this night, and then all of a sudden Frances said, just a minute, this wasn't 200 miles out, this was, you know, we could see the lights, you know, we were waiting for dawn. And she said, we're close enough, I bet my phone works. And she was the only one that had taken her phone. And she pressed her phone on, all of a sudden, bing, 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 bing. And we'd been on BBC Telly quite a lot before we went, so we had a lot of support from around the world. Actually, people had seen us and following us, and we hadn't realised how that had grown while we were out there, because we didn't get to find that out. And all of these messages on our Facebook page and things. So Frances spent about 2 hours just reading out all these beautiful messages from around the world, from people we didn't know or people we did know, with these amazing messages of support and how we'd impacted somebody's life. Like a lady in Canada had said her child had wanted to do something at school, an after school thing, and she'd always been too shy. And then they'd started watching us on TV and started following us, Dot Watching it's called, watching us go across and seeing our stories. And her daughter said, if they can do that, Mummy, I'm going to go and try this. And so we had all these sort of messages, these amazing messages from people of all shapes, sizes, ages, races, creeds, whatever, coming through. And that couple of hours then before the end of the race, so we had this massive low and then this massive high. And then the next morning we up anchored and we sailed to the harbour, and they told us we'd become world record holders, we're the oldest women to cross any ocean. Great. And then we went round the corner in the harbour, a big harbour, and all the super boats started peeping their horns, these massive great big horns, bah, bah, and all the crews were there. They were playing us music, they were cheering. All these little boats had come out to sail in with us. And then we got to the point where and I can never do this without crying, we went round the corner and I just saw my kids stood. And it was that getting off, and that first hug with the kids was just out of this world. I'll never forget it. I can't think about it without getting upset, but in a good way. In a really good way. And we couldn't walk. We'd been on the boat so long. We were swaying. And actually, you see us in the interview when we first got off, we're all swaying in tandem as we got off. And everywhere you walked, you kind of walked, but then started going sideways. And when we got back to the resort after we'd got through everything, I said, I just want to go and sit by the pool and have a cocktail. I'd dreamt about this for 10 weeks. And I almost walked into the pool because I couldn't walk straight. I was a half cut. So that was amazing.
So, like, even before you'd stepped off the boat, you were already helping other people. Like, you'd been empowering, you know, like that little girl.
Yeah.
Through doing something truly incredible, like record breaking, right? Absolutely,
record breaking, but not record breaking in a good way, because we came 22nd out of 26, so we didn't whoop it. Our world record wasn't the most inspiring of world records, being the oldest to do anything. But I think the thing that it did was it showed a lot of people that you don't have to be first, best, strongest to try things.
No.
Just take a step. Always just take a step forward and try things. It might not be what you want to do, it might not like it, but just give it a go, because the most surprising things happen. You meet the most amazing people and they help you on your journey, and you learn things about yourself and strengths about yourself you never realized. And I think just giving things a go, making the friends to support you to keep going, because that's really important, you know.
Yeah.
And that it's okay not to be the best or the greatest.
No.
It's good to be that, but you don't have to be that. I did a few races, ultra races, as part of my training for something else, the Marathon des Sables. And you know, on one of the days on these ultra races, we walked a lot of it. You know, we didn't race it. We were doing it for an endurance perspective. And one day, you know, we were one of the last people to come in because we'd had a chat, we'd taken some pictures on the way, we'd had a great time. And you got more encouragement from actually coming in at the back end than, you know, the people that finished first, it was like, well done. You come in near the back, you've got people running with you, walking with you, cheering you, coming in, giving you cake afterwards. So it's not a bad thing not to be great at everything, but it's a bad thing not to try things, not to give things a go, just because you think, like I used to think, that I would be no good. Okay. That doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's a beautiful message to finish on, I think. A beautiful message to finish. So is there, I'm just thinking, like, what if you hadn't said yes? How much regret would you be sitting here with right now?
Tons. I'd have seen what those girls had done, and I would have regretted it for a very long time. My thing now is I say yes to everything because I'm so worried about missing out. But I've had the most amazing adventures and I've met the most amazing people by just saying yes. I think it was Branson once said, always say yes and then figure out how to do it afterwards.
Yeah.
I think it's a good philosophy.
Love it. Thank you. All right. So thank you for sharing a little piece, because I could happily sit here and talk for hours about it and delve into more of the stories and all that kind of stuff. But thank you for sharing that with me and the listeners. And I think we definitely found examples, real life concrete examples of, you know, where having help has helped you, having a community around you has helped you, and the way that you inspire, have inspired, empower, and have empowered people without you even realizing it.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting story. I think people can relate to it as well, because a lot of people aren't super athletes.
Yeah.
And I think just seeing some mums from Yorkshire give something a go and do all right, you know, I think people think, well, do you know what? I could probably do something. And usually it's not rowing an ocean, admittedly, but it depends what your own personal challenge is, and everyone's got a different personal challenge. So.
Exactly. Thank you.